Thanks a lot for joining us on The World Today. I'm Anne Nwawado. Here are the headlines for today. Official death toll of people killed in Gaza by Israeli airstrikes passed 10,000, including over 4,000 children. South Africa recalls all of its ambassadors from Israel amid the rising casualty figures. Plus, King Charles delivers his first address to the British Parliament after ascending the throne. Thanks again for joining us, and let's get right into it. There are reports that dozens of people have been killed in Gaza overnight by Israeli airstrikes, and this happened in the cities of Khan Yunis, Rafah, and Deir al-Bala, which are cities in the southern part of Gaza, where civilians have been advised to move by the Israeli military. There has been no word from the Israeli military about these strikes, but there are reports they took control of Hamas' stronghold in northern part of Gaza in recent fighting. They also struck dozens of mortar shell launchers overnight, attacked Hamas targets from the sea. On the other hand, Hamas-run health ministry says that more than 10,300 people have been killed in the area, including more than 4,100 children, and this is in addition to the more than 300 people that were killed yesterday. Let's get into Khan Yunis, where earlier today rescuers and people searched beneath rubble for survivors, and that's after an Israeli airstrike hit Al-Karaba neighborhood. According to residents, people were sleeping when they heard the missile falling. He also said that all of them were children who were safe. At least 23 Palestinians were killed in two separate airstrikes earlier today in Khan Yunis, and that's according to health officials. Well, coincidentally, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres pointed to the plight of children during the war. In his address at the UN headquarters on Monday, Mr. Guterres described the situation in the Gaza Strip as slowly becoming a graveyard for children. He also said the protection of civilians must be paramount in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Israel has vowed to wipe out Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip after the militants killed 1,400 people and took more than 240 hostage in an attack on October the 7th.
Today, the United Nations and our partners are launching a $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal to help 2.7 million people. That's the entire population of the Gaza Strip and 500,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Some life-saving aid is getting into Gaza from Egypt through the Rafah crossing. But the trickle of assistance does not meet the ocean of need. And let's be clear, the Rafah crossing alone does not have the capacity to process 8 trucks at the scale required. The way forward is clear. A humanitarian ceasefire now. All parties respecting all their obligations under international humanitarian law now. This means the unconditional release of the hostages in Gaza now. The protection of civilians, hospitals, UN facilities, shelters and schools now. More food, more water, more medicine, and of course fuel entering Gaza safely, swiftly, and at the scale needed now. Unfettered access to deliver supplies to all people in need in Gaza now. And the end of the use of civilians as human shields now. None of these appeals should be conditional on the others. And for all of these, we need more funding now.
Over in Israel, people have been lighting candles at the Western Wall of Jerusalem, marking the 30th day since the deadly Hamas attack on October the 7th. Among those who attending that ceremony on Monday were Israeli Government Minister Benny Gantz.
I feel that we all pray to God that He be with us and that he help us in the war against violence. And it is God who's ruling the world, and all the army are his soldiers. And we all pray that they all win, because the world is experiencing a very traumatic experience, not only Israel.
A related development of silence was held across Israel and beyond. That happened today, commemorating the victims of Hamas attack on October the 7th and the people still being held hostage in Gaza. All over Jerusalem, flags were lowered at half-mast. In Tel Aviv, people gathered to sing Israel's national anthem, the Hatikah, Hebrew for hope, while those with loved ones still in captivity are praying for their safe return.
I'm waiting for them, for my son, and I think there is no way that is not a good way. Every way, in my opinion, is a good way to bring them back, to bring my Omar to his bed, to his family, to his life, to give all the children and the old people again to be freedom. It's unbelievable.
Yes, it's a long time. I hope that they will become, we can bring them healthy. I'm not sure, definitely. Every day passed, they're not good for us. We must, from my point of view, we must stop all the war ceasefire. We must get a ceasefire, and the first thing we must do to bring them home.
We are so sad, and we can't feel another feelings. We can't smile. We can everything that we are so we lose our happiness because of this situation, and that's why we came here.
And as different countries determine their response to the Israel-Hamas war, some are pretty certain where they stand. And one of those countries is South Africa, which has recalled diplomats from Israel to assess its relationship with the country amid a rise in civilian casualties from the war. The country has long been an advocate for peace in the Middle East and has rallied behind Palestinians, likening their plight to its one under apartheid regime that ended in 1994. The Foreign Minister, Naledi Pandor, says the recall is to determine potential for assistance and whether the continued relationship is actually able to be sustained in all terms.
Why recall our embassy officials? This is normal practice. When there's a situation which is causing a great deal of harm and concern to a country, you would get your officials to come back to the national setting in order to provide you with a full briefing so that you can make a determination as to whether there is any potential for you to be of assistance and whether the continued relationship is actually able to be sustained in all terms.
A genocide under the watch of the international community cannot be tolerated. Another Holocaust in the history of humankind is not acceptable. And the South African government has decided to withdraw all its diplomats in Tel Aviv for consultation. The position of the ambassador of Israel in South Africa is becoming very untenable. Cabinet has decided to instruct DECO to take necessary measures within the diplomatic channels and protocols to deal with the conduct of the ambassador of Israel to South Africa.
Now let's bring in VOA's Ricky Russin, who joins us now from central Israel. Ricky, thank you so much for joining us on The World Today.
Thank you.
All right. What has been the Israeli government's response to governments severing ties or even recalibrating its relations, or in this case, South Africa recalling all its diplomats from Israel?
There was no immediate comment from the Israeli Foreign Ministry regarding the South Africa move to recall its diplomat. It follows several countries, including Turkey, Jordan, several South American countries. Last week, Israel called on Colombia and Chile, who had recalled their diplomats, to explicitly condemn the Hamas as a terrorist organization and accuse them of being hypocritical.
But the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, says that Israel will take over Gaza's security, but that will happen after the war for an unspecified period of time. How are Israelis interpreting this decision?
I think he made this comment to an American news organization and not in Hebrew to the Israeli public or the Israeli military. So it's a little unclear what he means by this. The Americans have been urging him and the Israeli military to announce what their plans would be for the end game, or after they depose Hamas from the Gaza Strip.
It's been 30 days since this attack by Hamas. What is the mood in Israel today?
Today is a very somber day, somber and also angry. People, as you showed in your report, people went to the Western Wall to pray and light candles. Flags were lowered to half-mast, and people went to the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, to demand that the hostages be the first and foremost goal in this war, the hostage return. And it's a Jewish tradition that 1 month after death, the deaths are commemorated. And so you had 1,400 families and all of Israel commemorating 1 month after the death of the 1,400 people who were murdered by Hamas.
But while the government has promised to eliminate all Hamas terrorists, the death toll is still rising even as we speak. Some have questioned the numbers being released by the Hamas-run health service, but I mean, there's still concerns. While Israelis are praying today, do they also remember the dead in Gaza?
I think that actually on this day, the 30th day after the deaths of their own citizens, Israelis are not focusing on those numbers. But I've heard calls from Israeli peace organizations that, that there has to be some kind of ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and continuing to try to get civilians at the fire of the Israeli army. But I think from most of the public, today is not the day that they will focus on Palestinian deaths.
But Israeli airstrikes are really raining on Gaza, and while the government is saying the Hamas militants are hiding behind civilian population, is the government really being careful about hitting civilians in targets in Gaza?
I don't think it's not the government, it's the military, and what the military has said is this is a war. It's a war that Israel did not start. It's a war of defense after the Hamas attacks, and actually today they did open a humanitarian corridor from the north of Gaza where they're operating down towards the south, and there were images of Palestinians walking in this corridor holding white flags so that they would be attacked by airstrikes.
All right, Ricky, just wanted to find out, I mean, everyone wants to know if those sirens are also going off in Israel, warning people to take cover from possible Hamas airstrikes.
Yes, there are still sirens going off. There were actually many sirens going up in the north, coming from Lebanon, but there were as well several sirens today, just about an hour ago, in the southern city of Ashdod, and the Iron Dome prevented damage to people and property. But yes, there are sirens going off still all the time.
All right, thank you very much. VOA's Ricky Rosen from Central Israel. Thanks a lot for your time and your contribution on the world today. Let's check in on the evacuations out of Gaza after 4 failed attempts. Susan Basisio is able to get through the Rafah crossing from Egypt and escape bombardment of the Gaza Strip. The 31-year-old Palestinian American, one of the several hundred foreign passport holders allowed to leave the enclave since last week, says she faced acute danger. The month-long war has caused a deepening humanitarian crisis in Gaza as Israel's military campaign has intensified, with many of the territory's 2.3 million inhabitants repeatedly displaced as they struggle to find shelter and safety. Basisio, who has spent about half her life in Gaza and half in the United States, says that she had cramped with relatives into a single room in a stranger's house. They ran short of food and water and even endured sleepless nights during the airstrikes.
Me and my family all went to the border because the American embassy told us, oh, you can go, just show them the American passport and you can leave. And just a few meters far from us, a bomb just fell, blew up. I was panicking. I had the worst panic attack and I started screaming and crying. My dad is outside, my sister, my mom is outside, my nephew is outside, and I started screaming like crazy. I felt like my dad is gonna be blown to pieces, my mom is not gonna be there, and my nephew is gone. It's like, you die or you leave. What do you choose between? Your childhood memories, your home, your land, or being alive? So my mom started contacting the State Department. I even took videos of her talking to the American embassy in Israel because it was just so rude. It's cold. It's like so blunt that we're not going to be helping you. You're Palestinian at the end of the day. You're from Gaza Strip at the end of the day. They're not targeting Hamas. They're targeting civilians, kids. They want to, it's a genocide. It's a genocide against my people, my Palestinian people.
The UN Security Council meeting held on Monday regarding the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the United Arab Emirates ambassador to the UN, Lana Nusebe, amplified demands for the ceasefire in Gaza. But both Israel and the Hamas militants who control Gaza have rebuffed mounting international pressure for a ceasefire. According to Israel, hostages taken by Hamas during its rampage on the southern Israeli side on October the 7th should be released first. But Hamas says it will not free them or stop fighting while Gaza is under assault. Israel said 31 soldiers had been killed since it began expanded ground operations in Gaza on October the 27th and reiterated that Hamas was hiding with civilians and at hospitals. Hamas said the idea that Hamas was based in hospitals was a false narrative that the UN should verify.
No one is safe. More UN aid workers and journalists have been killed in 4 weeks than in any month of a conflict in decades. If ever, Palestinian civilians are also deprived of necessities essential to their survival. In the midst of this catastrophic situation, we emphasize the need for the Security Council to act with urgency and adopt a meaningful and actionable resolution. Over the past couple of weeks, members of the Security Council have been working tirelessly to this end. We call for an urgent humanitarian ceasefire. The Secretary General just made the same call this morning, a humanitarian ceasefire now. This is desperately needed to enable full, rapid, safe, and unhindered humanitarian access, including for UN and humanitarian personnel, consistent with international humanitarian law. We urge all parties to take steps urgently towards a cessation of hostilities to ensure the protection of civilians.
Civilians in Gaza cannot even find safety in UN facilities, schools, hospitals, and refugee camps. These civilian facilities have been under attack in violation of international law. It is imperative that their protective status is upheld. We condemn all violations of international humanitarian law, all violence against civilians, including all acts of terrorism and indiscriminate attacks. We condemn the 7th October attacks by Hamas on Israel. We also condemn the indiscriminate attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip. We express our grave concern at the continued detention of hostages and demand the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages, as well as their safety, well-being, and humane treatment consistent with international law.
And as for the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the situation in Gaza is extremely worrisome. He has made the call and adds that there needs to be an end to the horrible humanitarian and human rights situation going on there. His comments are coming following his meeting with Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Aboul-Gheit in Cairo. Mr. Turk announced that he will go to the Rafah border crossing in Egypt's North Sinai on Wednesday, November the 8th, before heading to Jordan.
It's the 1 month anniversary of this incredible escalation of violence that we have seen. I'm, of course, from a human rights perspective, extremely worried about the situation, about what is happening, and it is really important that a solution is found to end the violence and to get out of this horrible humanitarian and human rights situation for what's happening in Gaza.
The Israeli military has released video of what it says were strikes on Hamas targets near a hospital in northern Gaza. The army said it was targeting a Hamas base in a building adjacent to the Al-Quds hospital, where an attack was being planned. The strike led to secondary explosions, which the army says indicated the presence of Hamas weapons cache in the civilian area. The army also said it had taken the Hamas territory and the military stronghold in the north of the enclave, saying that anti-tank missiles and launchers, weapons and various intelligence materials have all been seized. Military videos showed tanks and bulldozers in action with buildings being blown up, and still photographs showed Israeli soldiers occupying buildings and advancing into the area. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday appeared willing to consider, among other things, allowing some form of humanitarian pause amid ongoing fighting in Gaza. But in a U.S. interview, he said there will be no ceasefire without the release of hostages by Hamas. Mr. Netanyahu told ABC News that Israel has allowed a tactical little pause at an hour here, an hour there during the war, and that, in his words, I suppose we will check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods, to come in or individual hostages to leave. Mr. Netanyahu's comments are coming days after he appeared in Rebuff to rebuff U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's calls for a humanitarian pause, when he said that there will be no let-up in Israel's operations unless there is a deal on the hostages.
There will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. As far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before. I suppose we'll check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods to come in, or our hostages, individual hostages to leave. But I don't think there's going to be a general ceasefire. It's not that I don't think. I think it will hamper the war effort. It'll hamper our effort to get our hostages out, because the only thing that works on these criminals in Hamas is the military pressure that we're exerting. Those who don't want to continue the way of Hamas, it certainly is not, I think Israel will, for an indefinite period, will have the overall security responsibility, because we've seen what happens when we don't have it. When we don't have that security responsibility, what we have is the eruption of Hamas terror on a scale that we couldn't imagine.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that it is irresponsible to engage in talks and holding an election in Ukraine in wartime, and called for unity to avoid pointless political discussions. Mr. Zelensky said it was critical to concentrate on the military challenges facing the country as it tries to push out Russian forces occupying nearly 1/5 of its territory, more than 20 months after launching a full-scale invasion. Elections are banned under martial law, now in force in Ukraine, while Mr. Zelensky had been considering whether to invoke special provisions to stage them, which is a change in the law, and the foreign assistance to help pay for the process. He had said he would like to run for a second term if a vote took place. There have been some calls from abroad, including from Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, who for an election to proceed as evidence of the good state of Ukraine's democratic institutions. Ukraine's foreign minister says the country will focus on alternatives to Black Sea grain initiative at a press briefing in South Africa's Pretoria. Dmytro Kuleba's comments come after days after the Russian side launched a major airstrike on the Ukrainian Black Sea port of Odessa, and that happened on November the 5th, with, according to officials, wounded at least 8 people. It set ablaze trucks loaded with grain and damaged one of the city's principal art galleries. Mr. Kuleba said that he did not see any encouraging indicators about the revival of the grain deal, and said that Ukraine will increase exports through European land routes. Russia has intensified its bombardments of Ukrainian ports, including Odessa, and grain infrastructure since July this year, when Moscow pulled out of that sea grain, which is a wartime deal that enabled Ukraine exports to reach many countries facing the threat of hunger.
I don't see any encouraging indicators about the revival of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. We focused on 2 alternatives. The first one is increasing the capacity, increasing export capacity by land routes through Europe. We see the biggest potential in the route that will take our grain to ports in Romania, Bulgaria through the territory of Romania.
And Russia has officially pulled out of the International Security Pact, which restricts the use of conventional weapons, saying that NATO's expansion has made such operation impossible. After announcing its intention to exit the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe earlier this year, Russia formally withdrew from the landmark pact at midnight today. Calling it history, Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the treaty was not catering to Russia's interest, adding that NATO countries began the circumvent restriction which was imposed as the US-led military alliance expanded. This move is coming less than 1 week after President Vladimir Putin revoked his own country's ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which outlaws all nuclear weapon tests and test launch an intercontinental ballistic missile which is capable of carrying nuclear warheads from one of its submarines. U.S. Democratic President Joe Biden is trailing Republican frontrunner Donald Trump in 5 of the 6 most important battleground states, exactly 1 year before the U.S. election, as American Express also doubts about Mr. Biden's age and their dissatisfaction towards his handling of the economy. That's according to polls on Sunday. Additional findings from the New York Times and CNN College polls released on Monday, November the 6th, showed that if Mr. Trump were to be convicted in criminal charges against him, then some of his support in some states will swing and it will erode by about 6%, enough potentially to decide the election. Mr. Trump, his party's front-runner for the 2024 nomination as he seeks to regain the presidency, leads in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania, with Mr. Biden ahead in Wisconsin Sunday's results show that Mr. Biden defeated Mr. Trump in all 6 states in 2020, but Mr. Trump now leads by an average of 48% to 44% in those states. While polls assessing the national popular vote was consistently showing Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump in a close race, presidential elections typically are decided by the outcome of a handful of so-called swing states.
If I were the Biden campaign, I would be very worried at this point, because even though polls are only snapshots in time and they're not supposed to be predictive, what they're really telling us is that approximately 1 year out before the election, in the critical swing states, the 5 or 6 states that are going to really decide the election, Joe Biden has a lot of work to do in terms of gaining the confidence of the voters in those states. And so I'm worried, because these are states he has to win, absolutely has to win to win a second term as president. And so what I would be thinking about right now is why? Why are people not viewing me favorably? And what do I have to start to do at this point in terms of making up ground and doing more competitively and acting more competitively in these critical swing states? So I don't just dismiss this. I take this very seriously in terms of telling me something about the state of my campaign 1 year out. We've never had a situation where we have a former president running for office facing 91 criminal charges across 4 felony indictments. And how that plays out in terms of the 2024 cycle, we have absolutely no predictions of this one, and no models that can tell us what's going to happen as a result.
Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump has complained about unfair treatment in defiant and rambling testimony on the witness stand at the civil fraud trial about his New York business, prompting the judge at one point to threaten to cut the testimony short. After questioning about Mr. Trump's organization's accounting practices, the former U.S. president clearly aggravated Judge Arthur Edgorn, who is weighing whether to impose hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and other penalties that could topple the real estate empire that vaulted Mr. Trump to prominence. But the judge warned Mr. Trump, the front-runner for the Republican nomination in the 2024 election, that he might remove him from the witness stand if he did not answer questions directly. Mr. Trump's testimony wrapped up in mid-afternoon, and his daughter, Ivanka, is due to testify on Wednesday, November the 8th, though she is not a defendant in that case. Unlike the 4 criminal cases Mr. Trump faces, the civil trial does not threaten to put him in prison as he mounts a comeback White House bid. New York Attorney General Letitia James is seeking $250 million in fines, as well as restrictions that would prevent Mr. Trump and his sons Eric and Donald Trump Jr. from doing business in their home state.
Everybody saw what happened today. Everybody saw what happened with their star witness, who admitted that I never told him what he originally said. I did. He admitted that he lied, and he has absolutely no credibility whatsoever. That's their only witness. That's their only witness. And I think you saw what I had to say today, and it was very conclusive. Everything we did was absolutely right. To think that we're being sued and spending all this time and money, and yet people being killed all over the world, that this country could stop. With inflation and all of the other problems that this country has, I think it's a disgrace. And when you look at the numbers, the poll numbers that came out today from the New York Times and CBS, I'm sure the Times was not too happy. But people are sick and tired of what's happening. This is I think it's a very sad day for America. But anyway, this is a case that should have never been brought, and it's a case that should be immediately dismissed. Thank you. Thank you.
We heard from Donald Trump in our case against him, other defendants, and the Trump organization. He rambled, he hurled insults, but we expected that. At the end of the day, the documentary evidence demonstrated that, in fact, he falsely inflated his assets to basically enrich himself and his family. He continued to persistently engage in fraud. The numbers don't lie, and Mr. Trump obviously can engage in all of these distractions, and that exactly what he did, what he committed on the stand today, engaging in distractions and engaging in name calling. But I will not be bullied. I will not be harassed. This case will go on. We look forward to hearing the testimony of Ivanka Trump on Wednesday, and then we plan on closing our case. And then there'll be some motions on Thursday, and then the defense will present their case in chief.
Channels Television's Washington correspondent Maria Bird joins us now for more. Hello, Maria. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Ian.
Why does Mr. Trump feel the trial is unfair to him, as he has said there? Does this have to do with the timing of the trial or the content of the case? What exactly is the problem in this matter?
Well, we know, as we've talked about before, that the former president has been brought before, whether it's civil cases and previously from other states. He was right in Washington, D.C. under trial not too long ago. And so he has repeatedly said this before, that it's unfair. He has created a story or a defense that someone is attacking him and really even attacking the American people by coming after him. So that has been what we've seen consistently across the board during these cases. And so it's not a surprise that he would say that, especially as you've mentioned, he is looking to run for re-election. He is looking to be the nominee for the Republican Party. So this is a time, obviously, that he is going to try to use this platform, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, to show his supporters that he is being attacked, and this is another reason why he should be the candidate for presidency.
His daughter Ivanka takes a stand tomorrow. What can we expect from her, especially knowing that she's not a defendant in this case?
Well, I think that she's going to try to be as honest as possible. We know that she has been sometimes walking a different line previously as it relates to some of the cases regarding her father and obviously even her role within the White House. And so it's going to be very interesting to see her brought up to the stand to testify. Potentially, she could plead the fifth on so many things. She could, say that she's not able to answer certain questions. So she could take that route as well. But I think we'll see a little bit different than probably what we've seen from the former president in her testimony tomorrow.
But let's talk about elections now. According to the polls, Mr. Trump is still in the lead, even in states where Mr. Biden won the last time. Could this trial have made him more of a candidate to beat in the upcoming presidential election?
You're bringing up a very valid point that I think many Americans are thinking about, especially those who are in support of the current President Biden. They are realizing that this could be a measure that is being utilized to assist with the campaign for presidency. And so they are very concerned about what this does mean for the current president and really for the Democratic Party. As some may know, today is election day in the United States for several state offices. And so this is also going to set the stage for what we potentially could expect from the 2024 elections, especially what the trend is and what the feeling and the temperature of the American people as it relates to politics.
How do Americans really feel about President Biden's policies and how he has governed the country over the last 2 years?
Well, you have many Americans that are great supporters. They were looking for something different. They were looking for someone to come in and stabilize. We know that the president has been a long-time politician. He's been vice president before. He served in Congress for a number of years. And he has been shown and stated as a foreign bridge builder, as someone that understands foreign relations. And so that is something that I think many Americans who are supporters of the president are very hopeful for, and hopeful that the American people as a whole can see that for the next administration, can see what they believe has been stability brought to the country with someone that is very familiar with governing the country and the way in which the U.S. government has operated for many years.
Apart from Mr. Trump, which other candidate is there for the Democrats apart from him? Are there any?
At this time, we've seen some smaller candidates come out, but no one has really risen to the ranks of what would be considered a candidate that could be in competition with the president. I think that we're getting to a period where it could become a little late, but we should definitely know if there is any potential candidate by the spring. As we head toward the beginning of the year, we've heard small names come out, but nothing that is at all in potentially that the Democratic National Convention would support and potentially could be the nominee for the Democratic Party.
All right, thank you very much. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Barrett, thanks for your time on the World's Day. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said that he is satisfied with the very positive engagement with China after meeting President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Monday. President Xi said on Monday that stable ties between China and Australia served each other's interest and both should expand with cooperation, sending a clear signal that Beijing was ready to move on from recent tensions. He says the first Australian leader to visit Beijing since 2016 has said the conflict in the world was raised in the meeting at the Great Hall of the People, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine and, of course, the war in the Middle East. He also brought forward the case of Australian writer Yang Hengjun, who has been jailed in Beijing for 4 years on espionage charges. For decades now, China and Australia built a relationship on trade, with Beijing becoming Canberra's biggest commercial partner, with purchases of Australian food and natural resources before ties soared after Australia, back in 2017, accused China of meddling in its politics. Staying with China, 3 people have been killed and 1 person injured after a structural collapse at a fitness club in northeast China's Heilongjiang province. Government officials and state media said that 7 people were in the Heilongjiang fitness gym in the Honan County when it collapsed late on Monday, November the 6th. An eyewitness video released the same day showed local residents entering the collapsed building looking for survivors amid the rubble, which was covered by snowfall. Initial reports said 3 people, possibly children, were at the venue or they were trapped inside when the building collapsed. The state media said this occurred at 7:20 p.m. It's still not immediately known what caused the collapse, but the country's northernmost province was slammed by harsh cold and blizzards throughout Monday, which wreaked havoc on public transportation and it closed schools. And in just a moment, when we return on the World's Day, and we'll take a look at what Napoleon's hat is all about. So that's in a moment. Please stay there. Welcome back. The G7 foreign minister talks to be held, says the talks will be held in Tokyo, and the important moment for the G7 to come together in the face of a Gaza crisis. So says the United States Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. Mr. Blinken also paid a courtesy visit to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida prior to his meeting with Japanese Foreign Minister Yoko Kamikawa. The group of 7 wealthy nations, that's Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United States, as well as the European Union, meet in Tokyo on November the 7th through to the 8th to discuss issues including the Israel-Gaza crisis and Russia's war in Ukraine. Kamikawa announced in her news conference on Tuesday that the G7 was arranging a virtual meeting with Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba to be held during the Tokyo meeting.
I very much appreciate the words of support and sympathy in the wake of the horrific attack by Hamas that did result, as you noted, in American victims as well as American hostages. And this is a very important moment as well for G7 to come together in the face of this crisis and to speak as we do with one clear voice. I look forward, as you do, to our discussions, and again, my thanks and appreciation to you personally and to Japan for bringing us together.
Meanwhile, Britain's King Charles III today delivered his first opening address of Parliament since taking the throne, laying out the government's policy priorities in areas spanning the economy, foreign policy and criminal justice. The annual address, known as the King's or Queen's Speech in a centuries-old tradition, marking a new parliamentary session. The remarks are prepared by the government and read out by the monarch. King Charles spoke of government initiatives to tame inflation, bolster energy security and protect consumers from hidden prices, outlining what Mr. Sunak hopes will be a vote-winning reform for the Conservatives. The monarch also voiced strong backing for allies Ukraine and Israel in their ongoing wars. It announced that the barbaric acts of terrorism against the people of Israel, but he said the United Kingdom will work to facilitate humanitarian aid for Gaza.
It is mindful of a legacy of service and devotion to this country set by my beloved mother, the late Queen, that I deliver this, the first King's Speech in over 70 years. The impact of COVID and the war in Ukraine have created significant long-term challenges for the United Kingdom. That is why my government's priority is to make the difficult but necessary long-term decisions to change this country for the better. My minister's focus is on increasing economic growth and safeguarding the health and security of the British people for generations to come. My government will continue to take action to bring down inflation, to ease the cost of living for families, and help businesses fund new jobs and investment. Legislation will be introduced to strengthen the United Kingdom's energy security and reduce reliance on volatile international energy markets and hostile foreign regimes. This bill will support the future licensing of new oil and gas fields, helping the country to transition to net zero by 2050 without adding undue burdens on households.
And we continue to follow Prince William on his visit to Singapore. Earlier today, he said he was proud of the team of finalists for the Earthshot Prize, which will be awarded later in the day. The annual Earthshot Prize awards £1 million, and that's about $1.22 million to 5 winners developing solutions to environmental problems. The 15 finalists this year range from scheme to plant, grow and digitally track trees in Liberia, to proposals for a less carbon-intensive method to treat industrial wastewater. William, who's the eldest son of King Charles and the heir to the throne, will walk the green carpet at the award ceremony on Tuesday night, which is also expected to feature celebrities like Kate Blanchett, Robert Irwin, and as well as activists, policymakers, and innovators. Pop bands One Republic and Brazil will be performing at that ceremony.
Okay, we let the Adam question as well. Miles, what?
Really excited about this year's winners and finalists. Last year we had 2 companies, both have expanded by 8 times and are moving into different countries. So it's all about scale now. My job is to really kind of bring the money and the capital and the private sector into the Earthshot and meet the solutions and go, come on, how can we scale, how can we do more? Well, I'm really proud of the whole team, to be honest. I mean, you know, Earthshot coming from a seed of an idea to where we are 3 years later, the whole point is to provide impact and to make change. But the guys and girls you've met are fantastic. They're the ones at the forefront, and over the next 10 years we've got to give them the support and all the help we can do so that their impacts are magnified greater than what they're already doing.
And finally, a hat worn by Napoleon during his reign at the helm of the French Empire is expected to fetch 800,000 euros. That's 854,600 US dollars when it goes on sale at an auction in Paris at the end of November. The black beaver felt hat's traditional shape was a trademark of the emperor, which came to symbolize Napoleon's historical character. It was worn on Bastille Day with its corns parallel to shoulders, as opposed to most of his officers who wore their hats that is perpendicular to the shoulders. This hat, together with the frock coat, forged the myth of the soldier emperor. The model will be auctioned in the house in Fontainebleau, is adorned with cockade that Napoleon fixed to his own hat in the year 1815 during the crossing of the Mediterranean from his exile in Elba to Antibes, where he led a brief return to power. The hat will go on sale on November the 19th, together with a nightshirt that the emperor wore on his final exile to the Isle of St. Helena, and a copy of his last will written out of the Count of Montholon at Napoleon's dictation. And that's it on The World Today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Anne Mwawadu.